Welcome to our podcast, Chaotic Chintan. I'm Pankaj Kumar and this is Vaidehi.
Hello.
The topic today is very interesting. Today we are going to talk about the US presidential elections 2024. So, this election is very interesting for multiple reasons. One, because how polarizing it is, and also because of the candidates themselves. We have one candidate who is convicted felon. I think there are 34 felonies against Donald J. Trump. The other candidate actually took his nomination back. And now we have a new candidate from the Democrats, Vice President Kamala Devi Harris. It's almost like a movie, if you think about it. There is an assassination attempt on the candidate, Donald Trump. So when that happened, you would think he will have the lead because of sympathy wave. From the looks of it, Kamala Harris is leading the favorability rating. We will dive into all of these things. And also the US presidential election is actually a lot more interesting because how it affects the rest of the world. If you think about it, US is a very different and a weird country. In a way, it's not a country in the traditional sense because it's actually the United States of America. Whereas usually when you think of a country, it's a country which has states. Whereas the US is just a collection of states. India is probably the second, I can think of the other country where the states have a lot of power. A lot of the times when US does something, it has impacts on all the other countries. If not all, at least most of the countries. So let's dive into this topic with our in-house expert on US elections, Vaidehi Paravastu. How are you, Vaidehi?
Good. Excited to talk about the election. I like your usage of the word weird. That has become a very famous term in the last couple of weeks.
Just so I clarify, I'm not getting paid. First thing that I wanted to talk about, Vaidehi, we only hear about two candidates, or especially we only talk about Democrats and Republicans. Why is that the case? Why are there only two parties in the US?
Yes, and this is a very interesting thing. So, firstly, a two-party system is common in many countries across the globe, but I think the US is the most famous for this because they have two very clear parties with differing agendas, and it seems to split the country right down the middle. When the United States of America was originally formed, the 13 colonies gained independence from Britain, and the founding fathers of America wrote their constitution. They never intended for political parties to be created at all. So George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, one of the pioneers of the whole freedom movement and the American Revolution, intended for public opinion to be translated into parliamentary debate via delegates. They wanted every section of the population to have one delegate, and all the delegates would come together to parliament and voice their people's opinion, and the most popular candidate would be elected president.
So the founding fathers almost thought of it like small communities coming together and electing their president, not so much having a systemized or institutionalized political parties.
I mean, it makes sense why they thought that way, because if you look at the original 13 colonies that made up the United States, it's pretty much the east coast of today's America. This is about 20% or less of their land. The rest of America was later integrated through either expansionism or deals that they made with France and Spain in purchasing large areas of land, which is famously known as the westward expansion. So a lot of those original characteristics still continue today, despite US being such a large country with such a huge population. 20 years immediately after the founding fathers set out certain rules in the constitution for presidential election and for federal elections, there was two parties that started getting formed, which is this is interesting. One side was called the Democrat Republicans and the other side was called the Federalists. And this evolved over time into Democratic and Republican factions that we know today. There is a common theory that as long as you only have one winner, and it is kind of a first past the post system, people and the electorate will favor a two-party system because they want an electable candidate.
I'm thinking you're talking about Duverger's law.
So Duverger's law essentially talks about why we end up with two-party systems due to various reasons. One is because people do not want their votes to become a wasted opportunity. They want their votes to count towards someone who is actually electable. So given you already have two major parties, if you have multiple candidates coming up in the fray, the vote gets split. And the smaller candidates that you vote for can never actually grow to become a representative of the people.
I'm also thinking this is not specific to the US because I feel this is happening everywhere, but probably because US is one of the older democracies, the consolidation has happened probably a little earlier. Whether that is a good thing or not, I personally think there should be choices. Numbers doesn't work that way. So, yeah. So let's jump into the controversy. Trump has been convicted for 34 felonies, if I'm not wrong. Can he still become the president? Like, are there no rules to who can become the president of United States? Like, it almost feels like if you have the money or if you have the will, you can become the president of the US.
There is only 3 criteria in the US Constitution that defines who can or cannot be a president, and the rules around who can run and how the presidential election will be governed are very loosely defined. So you have to be 35 years of age, you have to be a natural born citizen of the United States, and you should have lived there for at least 14 years. These are the only 3 rules. There are no other inclusions or exclusions specified in any other way, which means that if you meet these 3 criteria, you're eligible to become the president of the United States, provided you win the election. Now, Donald Trump is convicted of 34 felonies related to misrepresenting financials, and then there are 2 other cases that are still outstanding. The RNC, or the Republican National Convention, which is where the Republican Party chooses their nominee, happened already. So he's been chosen as the nominee. Now, since there is nothing preventing him from becoming the president, if the election happens and he wins the election, then he can be elected the president even if he's convicted and even if he has been sentenced by that time and in jail. Theoretically, there is no rule that says he cannot be sworn in from jail.
It feels like there was no intent to stop them from running for presidency.
We need to think of this from the perspective of when the US Constitution was written. The society at the time was very different. These were 13 self-governing colonies, each with their own militia, each with their own set of laws on what defines crime. And the social contexts are very different.
I agree, but they had 300 years.
It is possible no one thought that they would come to this point. It's uncharted territory, but at the moment there is nothing in the laws that stops a felon from becoming the president of the United States.
Presidential election happens on the first Tuesday after the first Monday of November. But what does that mean? Do people actually go and vote for the president or who they want to choose as their president?
On the first Tuesday of November, the common public goes out to vote, but they are not selecting the president directly. They are voting for something called an Electoral College, which is basically a group of delegates. This goes back to what we spoke about earlier about the Constitution, where George Washington and Thomas Jefferson wanted a representation of every section of the population will have one delegate present in the House who will vote on their behalf. So all of America is divided into 538 units where each of them will vote for a delegate. The number of delegates given to a particular state is basically depending upon the number of senators, which is just 2 per state, it's standard, and then the number of House representatives, which is based on the population of the state. So people will go out and choose a delegate for their particular constituency. And that happens on the first Tuesday of November. Once all of the delegates are elected, then the delegates come together in December to formally vote for a presidential candidate. Now, this might seem surprising because normally on the night of the election on Tuesday of November, we already have the winner declared by the media. The reason behind that is because we have 2 parties. It is naturally accepted that all members of a party will vote for the presidential nominee of their party.
But this feels inefficient given we have already decided on a two-party system? Because I mean, I guess it makes sense when you are not thinking of it as a two-party system. It makes sense because then you have an electoral college which will then go on and decide the actual president.
It is believed to strike a balance between populist voting versus equal representation of all demographies.
I might not agree, but okay.
That is the expectation of having people vote for electoral college, and then the electoral college representing constituencies. But essentially this is what happens. Everyone votes for delegates, and because delegates come from one party or the other, they will vote for the presidential candidate. Now, majority of states have the entire weightage of all delegate count going towards one side. So for example, if you take California, which has about 54 delegates, and the halfway mark is 27. So if one party had 28 delegates and the other party had 26, the winner party with 28 delegates can claim all 54 votes, which means that at the end of the day, the presidential pick need not be a representation of the actual vote share on the ground.
So my next question is, the electoral college system, is it outdated or and is it unfair? What are your thoughts on this?
First things first, we already touched upon how electoral college, the outcome of the electoral college need not be a direct representation of the actual vote share of the people, which means that a large number of voters can feel disenfranchised because at the end their voice is not being represented properly. Counter argument to that would be that the electoral college ensures that you need to get wide range of votes from across the country. There cannot be regionalism, or a few states with a high population cannot outweigh the other states' votes. Having said that, the election is largely driven by swing states or battleground states. While there are swing states, one, they are well distributed across the country, and the reason they are swing states is because they are the most populous states in the country, and therefore they have the largest number of delegates. So it's difficult to comment whether this is good or bad just by looking at one election or data from the last 10 to 15 years. Largely, the Electoral College has always been a representation of the popular vote. There have been one or two exceptions, which is a risk with this system. It might look like a complex election process, but it simplifies the final decision making because you have a bunch of delegates and you don't have to go to the public.
This did trigger a thought in my head about regionalism in India's context, at least, because of the way the country is divided in like languages and the region. So if I as a political party spend all my marketing budget on one particular language or one identity which covers 60 to 70% of the landscape, I will always win the election if the marketing works for that. So the other 30 to 40% population will always feel disenfranchised because they are not the target of the marketing. So tell us about gerrymandering. And I'm assuming it has some impacts on House of Representatives.
Yes. So firstly, what is gerrymandering? Gerrymandering is the process of redrawing district lines in such a way that the population in a particular district favors a particular candidate. So essentially, people who are inclined to vote for you will be reorganized into your district so that you have a guaranteed chance of winning. That's a very dumbed down version of what gerrymandering is. And it is actually a common practice. So it happens in two ways, either racial or political partisan gerrymandering. Racial gerrymandering has occurred for a long time and has been very controversial in the US. In fact, it has been talked about in the court, and the court has, in no uncertain terms, said this is unconstitutional to divide districts based on race. So obviously, if you're going to create a constituency with people who are favorable to you, you're going to win elections. When a particular representative gets elected to the House, he continues to be re-elected. In fact, over a decade. House elections happens every 2 years. A lot of times, there is not even an opposition candidate standing because it is very clear that the electorate is favored in a particular direction. Voter turnout is low. People do not stand as opposition, and it leads to the same people being re-elected over and over again.
If I simplify this, gerrymandering is rigging the elections officially. It is almost like tweaking the question paper so that the answer is always the same.
Now, you might wonder how political gerrymandering is even possible. This goes back to voter registration norms. all states have a mandatory voter registration requirement. One of the questions in the voter registration form is your political affiliation. There is a reason that they ask for this, but before coming to that, the fact that you collect people's political affiliation then gives people in a position of power to very easily do partisan gerrymandering. Why are we collecting political affiliation?
See, in my view, there is a reason why I think government should not know everything about you. It's very difficult to not give out information. But I think there are certain things that the government should not know. But there is a reason you said why this is needed, at least in the US's context.
In some states, any citizen can vote in any party's primary. But in some states, it is based on this party affiliation that is declared in the voter registration form. So based on your affiliation, you're asked to vote in that party's internal elections so that there is a democratic way of choosing the party's candidate.
But what if I want to change? I'm sure there has to be a process to change your affiliation.
There is.
Yeah, but it feels like a lot of work to change your opinion. I mean, there has to be some level of mystery to this process, right? I mean, the two-party system, that was not the intent. That's the outcome of the current design. I feel that if there are a lot of options for people, everyone will be on the edge and everyone will try to do a lot better. I think systems can be put in place to make sure that there are always more than two parties contesting. However, that's my opinion. What do you think of two-party system, and do you think it is working in US? Because what happens, I feel, is whatever happens in the US tends to replicate over in other countries. Also because they are one of the most influential countries.
Theoretically and ideally speaking, definitely the two-party system is not the best way to go, but that's just where the numbers are gravitating these days. Again, the theoretical advantage that the US has over other countries is that they have a very strong internal party democracy system. For the approximate 250 to 300 years that the US has existed, a large amount of time the parties have always been very centrist. If you had to win the presidential election and you had to win the popular opinion, you have to cater to all the different voices and demographic groups. That is no longer the case. And it isn't entirely a fault of the two-party system, it's a fault of how technology and social media has evolved and influenced and created bubbles, which is a topic in itself that we have to talk about later. Yeah. But it's not working. The two-party system doesn't work given the rapid technology evolution that has happened and how campaigns are being influenced by technology in the current state. So in my opinion, this needs to be seriously looked at and revisited, but there is no simple answer to it, and it requires a lot of research to be done.
Coming to the next topic, I think this is probably the most interesting topic, in my view at least. Unions and lobbies. Tell us about unions and lobbies in the US. How do they influence the election?
Union is a more global and common term in a lot of democracies, but lobbies not so much. Lobbies are a significant driving force in the US. A lobby is essentially a special interest group for corporations or a particular industrial sector that wants the corporation's interests are best represented to the government, backed by data and research, so that when decision making happens on laws governing either corporate regulations or environmental laws or any workers' labor related laws, the interest of the corporations are well represented, and in fact in today's case completely influencing policy decisions. And then there is, on the other side, unions who have the same motive of wanting to represent worker or labor interests. It's not just as simple as how many hours it is legal to work or something like that. It is more complex in terms of every policy. For example, the education policy will set out requirements for who qualifies to be a teacher, what background they need to have, how much education they need to have, do they need to pass an exam, things like that. So every profession will have certain standards set out by government and statutory bodies. And all of that is what unions attempt to influence in favor of the workers. Lobbies and unions actually fund electoral activities, like they fund campaign activities. There are laws in the US that have spending caps for spending by the candidates themselves or by the party themselves. That has led to the formation of these proxies called political action committees, better known as PACs, which is basically an amalgamation of various special interest groups, lobbies and unions that will fund campaign activities on their own. So they will decide which candidate they want to support, and they will create ads in favor of the candidate. They will actively work for a candidate, but not officially in the candidate's name or under the candidate's organization or umbrella. Unions in the US are not like unions, for example, in India or in other places. We are used to thinking of a union as the workers from one factory or one local area. In the US, unions are countrywide, and there are hundreds of thousands of people belonging to the largest unions, which is a significant number given the 350 million population of US. And in that context, they have a lot more influence on policy decisions, and a lot of times the union leaders and the lobbies, the main corporate lobbies, tend to influence and drive policy decisions in a certain way. And this might come off a little strong, but holding funding to ransom, literally. That somehow breaks the whole democratic nature of things, and that results in vested interests playing through.
For a country with so much focus on unions, US is one of the countries where you have less leave entitlements. Countries like India doesn't have have the concept of unions now, but there are more leaves for the employees. Unions are socialist and lobbies are capitalist. I mean, either both have to exist or neither have to exist, because there needs to be a balance. Although in US's context, I feel the lobbies are probably a bit more powerful, and it shows. Just remember, whoever is paying for the service, they are the one who are going to get the service. So if the lobbies pay for the candidate is going to work for the lobby.
The way I see it, they are a major driving force in preventing a lot of significant laws, game-changing laws, from being enacted. The most famous lobbies, NRA, the National Rifle Association of the US, oil lobby,
pharmaceuticals, food, supplements industry coming up now. They are spending a lot of money on lobbying. So in conclusion, what we have understood is democracy is not a system that you put in place. It's a system that you nurture, because if you don't, it can fall apart like a house of cards. No pun intended.
Is democracy in danger, Pankaj?
So democracy is always in danger. We have to be vigilant. We have to make sure that democracy is functioning and healthy. It also has repercussions to the global system. If one big country goes backwards, it can have impact on other countries, especially a large country like US and even India. There is a tendency for these ideas to spread. Let's see how this election goes.
Now, given that our we already spoke about the election having international ramifications, so it impacts those of us outside the US. What is our ask to the people of the US in this election?
Vote wisely.
Simple and succinct.
Thank you for listening to us. This is us, Chaotic Chintan. We will be doing a series of videos on US election, so come back and thank you.
Thank you, and please join us in another attempt to understand the chaos around us.
Please like and subscribe.